This is not a video about a game reaching the end of its life cycle. This is a video about a world being placed on life support by the very company it kept alive. This is a video about Destiny, about Bungie, about Marathon, about Sony, and more than anything, about an industry that keeps forgetting a very simple truth. Games are not loved because they are efficient businesses. They become efficient businesses when they are loved. That difference is everything. I need to be honest from the beginning. I am not neutral here. I am mourning. Not because a server is shutting down tomorrow, not because every weapon, every raid, every title, every character, and every memory is disappearing overnight. That is not what is happening. Destiny 2 will remain playable, but active development is ending. The live service model, the thing that made Destiny what it was, the ritual, the promise, the weekly conversation between Bungie and its players, is being retired. And that hurts in a way only players will understand. Because I am not mourning a product. I am mourning a place. I am mourning the idea that the people in charge understood what that place meant. Destiny was not perfect. Destiny disappointed us. Destiny overpromised. Destiny recycled content. Destiny confused new players. Destiny broke trust. Destiny asked for too much and sometimes gave too little. But Destiny also gave us moments no spreadsheet can understand. The first raid clear. The friend who came back after years away. The weapon that became part of your identity. The music before a final mission. The silence after a campaign ending. The feeling that somewhere beyond the screen, there was still another secret waiting. That is what executives keep failing to manufacture. They can fund content. They can buy studios. They can acquire technology. They can chase engagement. They can demand monetization. They can build systems designed to keep people logged in. But they cannot fake belonging. And the tragedy of Destiny is that Bungie already had it. They had the thing everyone else was chasing, and they spent years risking it in order to become something else. Destiny was not the failed experiment. Destiny was the evidence that the experiment had once worked. That is the part that makes this so painful. When Sony bought Bungie for $3.6 billion, it did not buy a logo. It did not buy a vague promise. It did not buy the memory of Halo, even if Halo was part of Bungie's legend. Sony bought Bungie because Destiny proved something every executive in gaming desperately wanted to believe. It proved that a game could become a ritual. It proved that players could return not for a weekend, not for a season, but for years. It proved that a fictional universe could become habit, friendship, identity, frustration, obsession, and home. Sony did not buy Bungie because Destiny was a small game. Sony bought Bungie because Destiny was one of the clearest proofs in the modern industry that live service could work at scale. A world that updates, a universe that persists, a community that argues, complains, leaves, returns, forgives, doubts, hopes, and still logs in. That is not easy. That is not common. That is not something you can create by writing recurring revenue on a strategy deck. And now, the active live service model that made Bungie valuable is being retired. Not because Destiny was meaningless, not because Destiny failed to matter, but because Destiny mattered so much that it carried ambitions far beyond itself. Bungie wanted more worlds. Sony wanted live service expertise. Executives wanted recurring revenue. Investors wanted retention. The market wanted the next Fortnite, the next Warframe, the next Forever game. But somewhere between the pitch decks, the roadmaps, the incubations, the layoffs, the delays, the rebrands, the missed expectations, and the corporate optimism, something was forgotten. A live service is not a content schedule. It is a relationship. And relationships die when one side only shows up to extract. To understand why this hurts, we need to go back. Before Destiny, before PlayStation, before Activision, before the phrase live service became a corporate spell, Bungie was already a strange and important studio. Marathon, the original Marathon, mattered. For older players, Marathon was not just a name being revived for a new extraction shooter. It was part of Bungie's identity before Halo turned the company into a household name. Marathon was science fiction. It was mystery. It was corridors, artificial intelligences, terminals, strange fragments of lore, and the feeling that the world was bigger than the screen. Then came Halo. Halo transformed Bungie. Halo became one of the foundational pillars of Xbox. Halo proved Bungie could build worlds that did not simply entertain players, but invited them to live inside myth. And then came the break. Bungie left Halo behind. It walked away from a franchise most studios would have held forever. That alone says something about what Bungie used to be. It was a studio willing to leave a throne because it wanted to build another world. That was the old promise of Bungie. Not comfort, not safe management of an asset. A dangerous kind of ambition. The kind of ambition that gave us Destiny. Destiny was not simply another shooter. It was an impossible pitch, a mythic science fiction shared world, part MMO, part loot chase, part shooter, part religious experience for people who like space magic and impossible architecture, part disaster, part miracle. At launch, Destiny was criticized, mocked, dissected, defended, and misunderstood. The story was strange and fragmented. The systems were incomplete. The famous line about not having time to explain why there was no time to explain became a symbol of the game's confusion. But something was there. The gunplay was there. The art direction was there. The music was there. The mystery was there. The promise was there. And most importantly, players were there. Even when Destiny stumbled, people could feel the shape of something bigger. Destiny became a game people complained about while playing for thousands of hours. That is a rare kind of contradiction. That is not failure. That is attachment. Destiny did something very few new franchises ever do. It survived its own rough beginning. Then it grew. The Taken King turned Destiny from a promise into something more coherent. Rise of Iron kept the flame alive. Destiny 2 arrived with its own problems, its own backlash, and its own reinventions. Forsaken restored faith. Shadowkeep changed the business model. Beyond Light, the Witch Queen, Lightfall, and the Final Shape each marked different phases of the same complicated relationship between Bungie and its players. Sometimes it was love. Sometimes it was anger. Often it was both. But through all of it, Destiny was the machine that taught Bungie how to survive in the modern market. Destiny gave Bungie independence after Activision. Destiny gave Bungie relevance outside Halo. Destiny gave Bungie community. Destiny gave Bungie leverage. Destiny gave Bungie the expertise Sony wanted. Destiny gave Bungie the language of seasons, events, expansions, dungeons, raids, cosmetics, monetization, and engagement. Destiny gave Bungie the credibility to say, "We know how to run a live game." And that is why the current situation feels almost obscene. The game that proved Bungie could live beyond Halo is now being moved into legacy mode, while Bungie tries to live beyond Destiny. History is repeating itself, but something is different. When Bungie left Halo, it moved from strength into mystery. When Bungie leaves Destiny behind as an active live service, it moves from exhaustion into uncertainty. That difference matters. Leaving a world behind because you are creatively restless is one thing. Letting a world wither because corporate ambition stretched your studio beyond its limits is another. Here is the argument I want to make very carefully. Destiny did not die because it was weak. Destiny is being retired as an active live service because it was strong enough to finance the dream of Bungie becoming something else. Now, let me be precise. There is no public ledger proving that Destiny directly paid for Marathon line by line.
We do not have Bungie's internal cost centers. We do not know exactly how every dollar moved, how every team was budgeted, or how every internal decision was justified. But we do not need a private accounting document to understand the larger truth. There is a public record proving that everything Marathon was allowed to become, the scale, the hiring, the acquisition value, the creative runway, the live service credibility, was built on Destiny. Without Destiny, there is no modern Bungie of this size. Without Destiny, there is no $3.6 billion Sony acquisition. Without Destiny, there is no claim that Bungie had world-class live service expertise. Without Destiny, there is no giant studio trying to build multiple new futures at once. Without Destiny, Marathon is not reborn at this scale, under this spotlight, with this expectation. So when people say Destiny funded Marathon, they are not necessarily making a neat accounting statement. They are making a historical statement. They are making a moral statement. Destiny built the house. Destiny paid the mortgage. Destiny filled the rooms with people. Destiny made the house valuable enough for Sony to buy. And then, when the owners wanted a new mansion, they started pulling beams out of the old one. The tragedy is not that Bungie tried to build something new. Studios should build new things. Creators should not be trapped forever by one franchise. The tragedy is that the old world was asked to pay for the new one, and then blamed for being tired. Destiny was treated like an aging asset. But to millions of players, it was still a living place. That is the wound. What makes this more than fan emotion is that Bungie itself has already described the shape of the problem. In 2024, during another brutal round of layoffs, Bungie said it needed to reduce costs and focus development efforts on Destiny and Marathon. The studio eliminated 220 roles, roughly 17% of its workforce. It also moved 155 roles, roughly 12%, into Sony Interactive Entertainment. That is not a small adjustment. That is not a normal reshuffling. That is a studio being structurally remade. And in the same explanation, Bungie admitted something important. It said it had become overly ambitious. It talked about trying to build 3 enduring global franchises. It talked about incubation projects. It talked about senior talent being pulled into new efforts. It talked about quality misses. It talked about Lightfall. It talked about needing more time for the final shape and marathon. It talked about costs. It talked about a changing market. It talked about running in the red. That is the public version, the sanitized version, the version designed to be responsible, corporate, respectful, and controlled. But even that version tells a devastating story. Bungie stretched itself too far. It tried to become a multi-franchise powerhouse while still depending on Destiny to carry the emotional and financial center of the company. And when a studio does that, something has to give. Usually, the thing that gives is not the executive dream. It is the existing game. It is the team already under pressure. It is the players already being asked to accept less. It is the world that is expected to keep producing loyalty while resources, attention, and belief move elsewhere. That is how a game declines. Not all at once, not with one decision, not with one villain in a boardroom. It happens through 1,000 small withdrawals. A smaller team here, a weaker season there, a delayed expansion, a confusing roadmap, a monetization push, a reused activity, a missed expectation, a community manager trying to hold back an ocean with a paper cup, a studio saying it hears you while clearly looking somewhere else. And after enough withdrawals, even love starts to feel like debt. Now we need to talk about Marathon. Because Marathon is not the villain. The developers working on Marathon are not the enemy. The artists, designers, engineers, testers, community people, and producers trying to make that game work are not the villains. Many of them are probably doing the best work they can under impossible pressure. And the original Marathon has a real place in Bungie history. It deserves respect. But the new Marathon did not arrive in a vacuum. It arrived carrying the cost of Destiny's decline. It arrived carrying the burden of Bungie's future. It arrived carrying the suspicion that Destiny players had already lost something so Marathon could exist. That is not fair to Marathon as a creative project, but it is true as a perception. And perception matters, because games are not received by spreadsheets. They are received by people. When players look at the timeline, they see Destiny shrinking while Marathon grows. They see Bungie talking about new beginnings while Destiny's weekly communication enters hibernation. They see seasonal events being retired. They see Destiny 2's final live service update arriving while Marathon gets seasons, trials, reworks, and the future-facing marketing push. They see reports that more developers are working on Marathon than Destiny. They see reports that Destiny 3 is not in active development. They see the studio's future being aimed elsewhere. And then they look at the numbers. That is where the decision becomes almost impossible to defend emotionally. On Steam, Marathon's all-time peak is about 88,000 concurrent players. Destiny 2's all-time peak is about 316,000. At the moment I checked, Destiny 2, a game whose active development is ending, had more live players on Steam than Marathon. Let that sink in. The old, wounded game. The exhausted game. The game being put into legacy mode. The game players say has been mismanaged for years. The game that already lost so much goodwill. That game was still ahead of the new bet on Steam at that moment. And I know the caveat. Steam is not the whole player base. Consoles matter. PlayStation matters. Xbox matters. Crossplay matters. No serious analysis should pretend Steam tells the whole story. But as a public thermometer, the comparison is devastating. Marathon's best public Steam number is not even 1/3 of Destiny 2's best public Steam number. And worse than that, Marathon's best numbers feel like Destiny's bad numbers. That is the catastrophe. Sony and Bungie appear to be ending the active life of the proven world in favor of a new game whose best visible performance looks like a wounded Destiny on a bad day. That is not just a strategic mistake. That is corporate malpractice at mythic scale. Again, I am not saying Marathon cannot improve. It can. I am not saying Marathon cannot find an audience. It might. I am not saying every extraction shooter is doomed. That would be lazy. What I am saying is this. If you are going to sacrifice trust, attention, resources, and the emotional center of one of the most important live service communities in gaming, the thing you are sacrificing it for needs to be undeniable. Marathon is not undeniable. Destiny was. Even broken, Destiny was undeniable. Even tired, Destiny was undeniable. Even when players were angry, Destiny was undeniable. And that is what makes this hurt. Marathon did not inherit Bungie's future. It inherited Destiny's debt, Destiny's expectations, and Destiny's sacrificed trust. The problems around Marathon are not only about player numbers. They are about confidence. A new game can survive low numbers if the narrative is strong. A new game can survive a rocky launch if the community believes the studio understands the problem. A new game can survive a delay if the delay feels like discipline. But Marathon's public story has been damaged by several wounds at once. There was the delay. Bungie said it needed more time after feedback from the alpha and reveal. The studio talked about improving survival fantasy, AI, world building, narrative, tone, solo and duo experiences, social features, and onboarding. That is a long list. A very long list. When a studio needs to improve almost every pillar players are questioning, the issue is not polish. It is direction. Then came the art controversy. An artist accused Marathon of using work too close to their own. Bungie acknowledged unauthorized use of art elements. The studio said those elements were connected to a former artist and promised a review. The matter may be resolved legally or privately, but publicly, the symbolic damage was massive. Because the game already needed to prove identity. It already needed to prove it was more than a corporate extraction shooter wearing an old Bungie name. And then it faced a plagiarism controversy. For a studio built on world identity, that is not a small problem. That cuts deep. It tells players that the new world does not yet feel sacred, even to the machine building it. Maybe that is unfair. Maybe the developers who truly care about Marathon are furious too, but the public does not experience internal nuance. The public experiences the headline. Delay. Plagiarism controversy. Player decline. Free week. Season 2 rescue attempt. Destiny final update. No Destiny 3 in active development, according to reports. Possible layoffs, according to reports. That is the story people see. That is the story Sony and Bungie now have to fight. And the cruelest part is that this did not have to be framed as Destiny versus Marathon. But the companies made it feel that way. By ending active development on one while betting the studio's future on the other, they created the comparison. Players did not invent that wound. They are reacting to it. Sony's role here matters, because Sony bought Bungie during a moment when the entire industry was intoxicated by live service. Everyone wanted the forever game. Everyone wanted recurring revenue. Everyone wanted battle passes, seasons, cosmetics, player retention, engagement loops, daily active users, monthly active users, and a community that never leaves. But too many executives looked at successful live service games and learned the wrong lesson. They saw the revenue. They did not see the relationship. They saw the retention. They did not see the ritual. They saw the monetization. They did not see the meaning. They saw players returning. They did not ask why players wanted to return. That is the fatal flaw. The problem is not that games became a business. Games were always a business. Arcades were a business. Atari was a business, Nintendo was a business, Sega was a business, PlayStation was a business, Xbox was a business, Steam is a business, mobile games are a business. Destiny was a business. The problem is not business. The problem is order. The problem is that somewhere along the way, the business stopped serving the game, and the game became an excuse to serve the business. The people making the biggest decisions in gaming today often understand monetization better than meaning. They understand engagement better than attachment. They understand retention better than love. And that is why they keep failing. Sony's recent live service story is not a story of mastery. It is a story of confusion. Concord launched and disappeared almost immediately. The Last of Us Online was canceled because Naughty Dog understood that supporting a live service would risk transforming the entire studio and damaging the single-player narrative games that define it. Other live service projects were delayed, reduced, rethought, or canceled. Sony wanted the live service future. But wanting the result is not the same as understanding the cause. You cannot simply decide you want a Destiny. You cannot simply acquire the company that made Destiny and assume the magic is now transferable. You cannot take the studio whose value came from a beloved live universe, put that universe on the path to hibernation, and expect players to applaud because the portfolio still has a shooter. That is not how love works. That is not how communities work. And now Sony has recorded massive impairment losses against Bungie assets. That is the financial language of disappointment. That is the balance sheet admitting the dream became smaller. But players already knew that. Players felt the impairment before investors saw it. They felt it in weak seasons. They felt it in fatigue. They felt it in confusion. They felt it when Destiny started to feel less like the center of Bungie and more like an obligation Bungie had to maintain while chasing its next identity. That is why this is bigger than one game. This is about a company buying a lesson and misunderstanding the meaning. Sony thought it was buying live service expertise, but Destiny's real value was not only systems, pipelines, analytics, monetization, and technical infrastructure. Destiny's real value was trust. Damaged trust, yes. Complicated trust, yes. Trust that had been broken and repaired and broken again, yes. But trust nonetheless. The kind of trust that makes people return after they swear they are done. The kind of trust that turns criticism into commitment. The kind of trust that makes a player say, "I hate this game," while logging in again. That is not rational. That is not clean. That is not easy to monetize responsibly. But it is real. And Sony, Bungie, or any executive trying to understand live service should start there. Not with the store, not with the roadmap, not with the season pass. With trust. Destiny's tragedy belongs to a much larger pattern. The industry has been chasing live service success like it is a formula. But the graveyard is full. Anthem tried to become the next great shared world and collapsed under the weight of unclear vision, technical problems, and corporate pressure. Suicide Squad killed the Justice League, took one of the most respected single-player superhero studios in the world, and pushed it into a live service shape that many players never wanted from that team. Redfall turned Arcane, a studio known for immersive design and authored worlds, into something that felt misaligned with its own soul. Hyenas was canceled before launch after massive investment. Concord became an industry warning sign, not because every hero shooter is doomed, but because even huge corporate backing cannot force a community into existence. The pattern is not that live service is bad. That would be too simple. Warframe exists, Final Fantasy XIV exists, Fortnite exists, Path of Exile exists, Destiny existed. The pattern is this. When live service grows from a world people already want to inhabit, it can become extraordinary. When live service is imposed as a business model before the soul of the game has earned devotion, it becomes extraction with matchmaking. And players can feel the difference. Players are not stupid. They know when a game wants to entertain them. They know when a game wants to move them. They know when a game wants to challenge them. They know when a game wants to become part of their lives. And they also know when a game wants to manage them as a retention cohort. That is the disease. Not ambition, not monetization by itself, not updates, not seasons, not cosmetics. The disease is contempt disguised as strategy. The disease is believing players are predictable inputs in a revenue model rather than people seeking meaning, mastery, beauty, status, friendship, and escape. The disease is C-suite confidence without cultural understanding. The disease is executives who love markets more than games, trying to command communities created by people who loved games first. Destiny had something the industry keeps trying to synthesize. A language. Guardian, ghost, light, darkness, the traveler, the witness, the tower, the reef, the crucible, trials, iron banner, Zur, Gjallarhorn, vault of glass, Crota, Oryx, Savathun, Cade, Zavala, Ikora, Ahankara, the dreaming city, the pale heart. These are not just nouns. They are emotional coordinates. Every long-running game develops a private language with its players. That language is the evidence of belonging. You cannot fake it at launch. You cannot buy it with an acquisition. You cannot generate it with market research. It is built over years of shared victories and shared disappointments. Destiny had that, and that is why people stayed even when the game hurt them. A normal bad game is abandoned. A loved game is argued with. Destiny was argued with for 12 years. That is not weakness. That is proof of life. When players scream, complain, create videos, write essays, beg for changes, and keep returning, they are not proving the game is dead. They are proving it still matters. Apathy is death. Destiny had anger. Destiny had grief. Destiny had resentment. Destiny had hope. Those are signs of attachment. And somehow, the industry keeps mistaking attachment for guaranteed revenue. It is not guaranteed. It has to be honored. Destiny needed stewardship. Destiny needed patience. Destiny needed a coherent future. Destiny needed a studio willing to say, "This world still matters enough to fight for." Instead, players got the feeling that Destiny had become the old engine funding new ambition. And once players feel that, every mistake becomes evidence. Every weak season becomes abandonment. Every marathon trailer becomes betrayal. Every delay becomes proof. Every silence becomes disrespect. That is why this moment is so dangerous for Bungie. Because the problem is not only that Destiny players are sad, the problem is that Bungie's core identity is now damaged. This is the studio that builds worlds that inspire friendship. That is not just marketing language. That is a sacred promise. But what happens when the world that inspired those friendships is retired before its players believe its future was protected? What happens when friendship becomes a legacy feature? What happens when the community that made the company valuable starts to feel like collateral damage? There is a dangerous belief in modern entertainment. The belief that audiences are transferable. That if a studio has fans, those fans will follow. That if a company has a brand, the brand can be stretched. That if a player loved one world, they can be moved into another with enough marketing. Sometimes that works. Often, it does not. Communities are not inventory. They are not fluid assets. They are not guaranteed passengers on whatever vehicle the company builds next. Destiny players are not automatically marathon players. Halo players were not automatically Destiny players. The Last of Us fans were not automatically hungry for a massive live service future. Arcane fans were not automatically Redfall fans. Rocksteady fans were not automatically Suicide Squad live service fans. Fans follow trust, not logos. And trust is specific. It attaches to tone, memory, mechanics, rhythm, identity, and emotional history. Destiny's community was not simply Bungie's property. It was a relationship between a very particular world and the people who chose to keep returning to it. That relationship cannot be reassigned. It cannot be transferred by executive decision. It cannot be migrated like an account database. And if players feel their home was neglected so the studio could build a different home for a different audience, they will not simply move. They will grieve. They will resent. They will remember. And they will judge the new home more harshly because of what it cost them. That is the problem Marathon faces. Not only gameplay, not only balance, not only onboarding, not only progression. Marathon must convince players it deserves a future built on ground many believe was taken from Destiny. That is an almost impossible burden. And Bungie created it. Let us talk about leadership. Not developers, not the people implementing systems, not the people losing jobs while executives explain strategy. Leadership. C-suites across the games industry have spent years chasing trends with staggering confidence and inconsistent understanding. They saw Battle Royale explode. Suddenly, everyone wanted Battle Royale. They saw live service dominate revenue charts. Suddenly, everyone wanted live service. They saw extraction shooters rise. Suddenly, extraction became the next possible frontier. They saw cosmetics, seasons, passes, user-generated content, and platform ecosystems. Suddenly, every franchise was asked whether it could become a forever machine. But the biggest decisions in creative industries cannot be made only by trend recognition. Trend recognition is not taste. Market analysis is not vision. A revenue forecast is not a world. A retention curve is not love. And that is where so many modern game failures begin. Executives do not necessarily fail because they are stupid. Many are extremely intelligent. They fail because they are fluent in the wrong language. They can read markets, they can read margins, they can read forecasts, they can read investor expectations. But can they read the room? Can they read the players? Can they read the spiritual contract between a studio and its community? Can they understand why a flawed game can be more valuable than a polished product if the flawed game has a soul? Can they understand that sometimes the smartest business decision is to protect the love before optimizing the revenue? That is what seems missing. Not money, not talent, not technology. Love. And I know that sounds naive. It is not. Love is not the opposite of business. In games, love is the foundation of durable business. A player who loves a game will forgive. A player who loves a game will return. A player who loves a game will bring friends. A player who loves a game will create content for free. A player who loves a game will defend it even while criticizing it. A player who loves a game will turn a product into culture. That is not softness. That is the strongest economic force in gaming. The industry keeps trying to monetize love without protecting the reasons love exists. That is the contradiction. That is the collapse. That is the lesson of Destiny. I do not want to pretend Destiny was innocent. That would make this video weaker. Destiny made mistakes. Big ones. The content vault damaged trust. The new player experience became almost impossible to explain. Monetization became exhausting. The seasonal model became repetitive. Important story beats disappeared. Players were asked to care about a universe that often made itself hard to access. Lightfall hurt the game at a crucial moment. The path after the final shape should have been handled with extraordinary care, and instead, for many players, it felt like confusion. These things matter. They should not be ignored, but they do not weaken the case for Destiny. They strengthen it. Because even with all of that, people stayed. Even after all of that, people came back. Even after all of that, Destiny still mattered. Even after all of that, Destiny's worst visible moments could still compete with Marathon's best public numbers. That is the most damning comparison of all. Imagine having a franchise so powerful that even after years of fatigue, anger, mistakes, confusion, monetization backlash, narrative barriers, and declining trust, it still holds a public footprint your new bet cannot easily surpass. And your decision is to retire that franchise's active live service model? That is insane. Not because Destiny deserved infinite content forever. No game does. Not because Bungie should never create anything else. It should. Not because every Destiny player is entitled to endless expansions. They are not. It is insane because the decision appears to misunderstand the difference between a tired community and a dead one. A tired community can be healed. A betrayed community becomes dangerous. Destiny did not need to be milked forever. It needed a future worthy of what it had already built. Maybe that future was Destiny 3. Maybe it was a true relaunch. Maybe it was a smaller but more respectful annual model. Maybe it was a long preservation phase with a clear promise of what comes next. Maybe it was a radical reset built in open conversation with the community. But what players got instead feels like a goodbye wrapped in corporate optimism. A monument, a thank you, a hibernation. A promise that once there is more news, we will be the first to know. That is not enough. Not for a universe that carried a studio. The games industry often talks about economies, in-game economies, virtual economies, premium economies, cosmetic economies, player time economies. But the most important economy in games is emotional. Every game asks players for something: time, attention, money, patience, trust. A live service asks for even more. It asks players to believe that tomorrow matters. It asks players to invest not only in what exists, but in what might exist later. It asks players to tolerate imbalance because patches are coming. It asks players to tolerate gaps because seasons are coming. It asks players to tolerate narrative questions because answers are coming. It asks players to tolerate today because tomorrow might be better. That is the emotional contract. Destiny lived on that contract for years. Sometimes Bungie honored it. Sometimes Bungie abused it. But the contract existed. Now the contract is being rewritten, and players are realizing something painful. For years, they believed they were investing in a continuing world. Now they are being told that world will remain playable, but no longer truly alive in the same way. That is not just a content update. That is a spiritual downgrade. And it reveals the risk at the center of all live service games. When a single-player game ends, the ending is part of the art. When a live service ends, the ending can feel like eviction. You are not simply finishing a story. You are being told the place you visited will no longer grow. The lights remain on, but the city stops expanding. The vendors repeat themselves. The festivals become memories. The future becomes a museum. That is what Destiny is becoming. A beautiful museum. A playable monument. A place full of ghosts. And maybe that is why Monument of Triumph is such a perfect and painful name. Because monuments are built for things that are no longer living in the same way. They are built to remember. They are built to honor. They are built after the battle. They are not built for the future. This is also about the developers. The tragedy of modern gaming is that the people who make the worlds are often the first to pay when leadership misjudges the market. Developers pour years of life into games. They miss family time. They endure crunch. They survive reorganizations. They watch players blame them for decisions they did not make. They watch executives announce strategy. Then they watch layoffs arrive when strategy fails. Bungie's developers deserved better. Destiny's players deserved better. Even Marathon's developers deserved better. Because Marathon now carries a level of resentment no new game should have to carry. That resentment was created by leadership decisions, by resource allocation, by messaging, by strategic overreach, by a failure to protect the world that made all of this possible. The people building Marathon now have to prove not only that their game is good, they have to prove that Destiny did not die for nothing. That is an unfair burden. But it is the burden they inherited. And if Marathon fails, the damage will not be limited to one game. It will raise a much darker question. What exactly did Bungie sacrifice Destiny for? If the answer is a smaller audience, a damaged brand, layoffs, impairment losses, and a community in mourning, then this will be remembered as one of the great strategic failures in modern gaming. Not because a studio tried something new, but because it risked something priceless without securing something worthy. I do not want this video to become pure cynicism. Cynicism is easy. It is easy to say everything is greed. It is easy to say executives ruin everything. It is easy to say players should never trust studios. It is easy to say the industry is dead. I do not believe that. Games are not dead. The industry is not dead. Great games still exist. Brilliant developers still exist. Studios full of passionate people still exist. Players still care. Maybe too much. That is why this hurts. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And Destiny players are not indifferent. They are grieving because they cared. They are angry because they believed. They are loud because the world mattered. That is not a weakness in gaming culture. That is the reason gaming culture exists. Games are interactive memory. They are places we go with other people. They are stories we inhabit. They are systems we master. They are identities we try on. They are friendships we maintain. They are escapes that become real because the feelings are real. A corporation can own the IP, but it does not own the meaning players built inside it. That meaning belongs to everyone who was there. Every guardian who ran their first strike. Every fire team that wiped for hours and finally cleared. Every player who came back after years away. Every person who used Destiny to survive a difficult season of life. Every friendship that started with, "Do you need one more?" Every voice in a raid group at 2 a.m. Every player who heard the music swell and felt, for a second, that a game could be bigger than entertainment. That is real. That is why we care. And that is why the business side has a responsibility to respect what it did not create alone. Executives keep asking how to make players return. The better question is why players ever wanted to stay. That question changes everything. If you ask how to make players return, you design hooks. If you ask why players wanted to stay, you design meaning. If you ask how to make players spend, you design pressure. If you ask why players want to support the game, you design gratitude. If you ask how to increase engagement, you design obligation. If you ask why players feel attached, you design belonging. Destiny, at its best, understood belonging. The tower was not only a menu, it was a home base. Raids were not only activities, they were social rituals. Exotics were not only loot, they were stories players carried. Lore was not only text, it was a hidden architecture for obsession. The soundtrack was not only music, it was memory. That is what must be protected. That is what Sony should have understood. That is what Bungie should have protected with everything it had. Not because nostalgia is enough. Nostalgia alone becomes rot. But because meaning is the soil where new things grow. If Bungie wanted Marathon to succeed, Destiny's community should not have been made to feel abandoned. The path to Marathon should have been paved with confidence, not resentment. The future of Bungie should have looked like expansion, not extraction. Instead, the message many players received was this: "Thank you for building the house. Now please watch us move into another one."
What should Bungie and Sony have done? There is no easy answer. Game development is hard. Budgets are brutal. Live service is demanding. Player expectations can be unreasonable. No studio can support every dream forever. But there were better paths.
A clear Destiny future should have existed before ending active development. If Destiny 3 was impossible, say why and show the alternative. If Destiny 2 needed a smaller future, define it with respect. If Marathon required resources, be honest about what that meant. If the studio had to shrink, do not pretend uncertainty is excitement. If the universe is moving beyond Destiny 2, show the bridge. Do not ask players to leap into fog. The problem is not that Destiny 2 could not continue forever. The problem is that the end of its active development does not feel like the beginning of a clearly loved future. It feels like a retreat. It feels like a company trying to preserve optionality. It feels like leadership keeping doors open while players watch their world close. And because Marathon exists in the foreground, players naturally connect the dots. Maybe internally the story is more complicated. It probably is. But externally, the picture is simple. Destiny ends active development. Marathon continues. Destiny has the legacy. Marathon has the future. Destiny has the larger historical numbers. Marathon has the corporate bet. Destiny has the love. Marathon has the pressure. That is a brutal trade. And right now, it looks like Sony may have traded a wounded giant for an unproven survivor. So here is the accusation. Not that Bungie made Marathon. Not that Sony wanted live service growth. Not that Destiny 2 had to receive infinite content forever. The accusation is this. Bungie and Sony appear to have misunderstood the source of Bungie's value. They treated Destiny like a product life cycle. But Destiny was a cultural asset. They treated the community like a legacy audience, but the community was the proof of concept. They treated live service like an operational model, but live service is a relationship. They treated Marathon like the future, but Marathon was being built on top of trust Destiny had already spent years earning. And when you spend trust faster than you create meaning, eventually the account goes negative. That is where Bungie is now. Not creatively dead, not beyond saving, not without talent, but in trust debt. A trust debt with Destiny players. A trust debt with its own employees. A trust debt with an industry watching to see if the studio that helped define live service can survive its own lesson. The tragedy of Destiny is not that a game got old. All games age. The tragedy is that a world with life still inside it was managed like a declining asset while the company chased a future that has not yet earned the same devotion. And if that future fails, the question will haunt Bungie for years. What did you sacrifice? And for what? I keep coming back to one thought. Destiny deserved a future built by people who loved it enough to fight for it, not merely manage its decline. That does not mean Destiny needed to last forever. Nothing lasts forever, not even stars. But endings matter. And when you end the active life of a world people loved, the ending needs to feel worthy of the life that came before it. Right now, this does not feel worthy. It feels like a monument built because the architects no longer know how to keep the city alive. Maybe Bungie still has a plan. Maybe Marathon will find itself. Maybe a new Destiny project will one day be announced. Maybe this is not the end of the universe, only the end of one era. I hope so. I want to believe that. But hope is not a strategy, and players have been asked to hope for a very long time. So I will say this plainly. Destiny was not just content. Destiny was not just a live service. Destiny was not just a revenue stream. Destiny was not just Bungie's past. Destiny was the reason Bungie had this future to risk. It was the world that carried the studio from independence to acquisition. It was the proof Sony wanted. It was the ritual players returned to even when they were angry. It was the flawed, beautiful, exhausting, unforgettable machine that taught an entire industry what a shared world could become. And if the industry wants to understand why so many of its biggest bets keep collapsing, it should stop asking how to build the next live service. It should ask a much older, much simpler question.
Who here still loves games enough to make one worth staying for? Because games are not loved because they are efficient businesses. They become efficient businesses when they are loved. Destiny proved that. Bungie forgot that. Sony paid billions to learn it, and somehow still seems to have missed the point. I am not mourning a product. I am mourning a place. I am mourning the idea that the people in charge understood what that place meant. And I am mourning the possibility that one of the most important lessons in modern gaming will only be understood after the world that taught it has gone quiet. Per audacia ad astra. Through boldness to the stars. But boldness without love is only strategy. And strategy alone cannot build a universe worth coming home to.